Hey guys, tonight we head into the slick, whispery corridors of post-war Chicago, where the streets hum with jazz, votes shift in backroom silence, and a man known as Mooney begins his slow ascent with nothing but sharp eyes and a quicker tongue. Imagine the smell of wet pavement and the rattle of trolley lines overhead, the taste of cheap cigars and peppermint gum under dim corner lights. This isn't just history. It's the sound of charm sharpening itself into menace. You're about to meet Sam Giancana, the mobster who laughed more than he shouted, and who preferred a perfectly stirred cocktail to a messy scene. But behind the tuxedos and Sinatra winks was a man raised on immigrant grit and shaped by alleys where no one watched. And as you'll soon learn, you probably wouldn't last 2 days in the Chicago he ruled, unless of course you smiled just the right way. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with fists, small ones at first, knobby, wiry, always clenched. In the early 1920s, Chicago's Little Italy simmers with steam from the sewers and the muffled tension of immigrant households learning to live without losing themselves. And somewhere on South Damen Avenue, young Salvatore Sam Giancana is already trouble with a lowercase t, but you know the kind. Teachers whisper, neighbors lock up early, mothers nod and say nothing. Sam is the third of 7 children, born in 1908 to Sicilian immigrants. His father, Antonio, is a stern, straight-spined baker. No nonsense, no smiles. And yet, somehow, even Antonio knows that the quiet son with slicked hair and sly eyes isn't going to need dough forever. Sam earns the nickname Mooney for his unpredictable, moody temper. He gets into scraps often, not the playful kind either. He's the type to swing first, apologize later, and only if it helps. One local story says he once knocked a kid cold for sneezing too close to his slice of pizza. Another time, he slashed a bicycle tire, not because it blocked his path, but because it didn't move fast enough. Most boys in the neighborhood chase stickball. Sam chases turf. And when he's not doing that, he's learning cars. Not from school, but by hot wiring them. It's said he could boost a Model T before you finished lighting a match. These were more than games. They were training drills. Sam's early mischiefs were less about rebellion, more about rehearsal. By age 10, he's already on the radar of the local beat cops, who know better than to snitch him to his father. One officer reportedly said, Antonio would have broken Sam's bones if he knew half of what that boy was up to. So they let small fires burn, hoping no blaze would spread. Many people still think that Giancana's childhood was just like any poor immigrant kid's. A little rough, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary. But walk a little closer and you'll find that Sam wasn't surviving the streets. He was practicing ownership. You see, while most kids stole fruit from carts, Sam stole silence. He knew how to hush a crowd with a glance, how to smirk instead of shout. By the time he was 15, boys twice his size gave him space without asking. Not because he was strong, but because he was strange. That kind of power, it's rarely taught, and never safe. In the evenings, after causing just enough mayhem, Sam would slip into his father's bakery, flour still dusting the counters. He'd sit quietly, sometimes rolling dough without being told, eyes blank, mouth tight. Antonio never asked questions. Perhaps he knew. Perhaps he didn't want to know. Years later, one of Sam's old neighbors said, He wasn't born cruel, just cold, like he was saving warmth for something else. The neighborhood, of course, didn't lack options. The outfit had fingers in every corner store, every church raffle, every half-built fence. And as a boy, Sam had already begun noticing who handed out turkeys at Christmas and who collected favors the week after. There's a moment, often forgotten, when childhood ends not because of age, but because of understanding. For Sam, that moment arrived on a street corner with a cigarette he didn't pay for, watching a man in a hat count envelopes under a lamp that flickered too much to be natural. He didn't speak, just watched. From that moment forward, he didn't need permission to enter the world that ran parallel to school and chores. He had already stepped through the door. Antonio Giancana rarely raised his voice. He didn't need to. The man had hands like dough hooks and eyes that didn't blink unless it was Sunday. He ran his bakery with the precision of an army sergeant, measuring yeast like it owed him money. And for a while, young Sam lived in the shadow of that rigid rhythm. Flour at sunrise, trays by noon, and silence after dark. But there was something colder than bread dough between father and son. Sam never called him Papa. He just nodded, eyes narrowed, always a step back, like he didn't want to get caught too close to that brand of discipline. And Antonio? He treated his son like a crack in the wall. Something you plaster over, never fix. The neighborhood saw it. So did the priests. And by the time Sam hit his teens, there were whispers that Antonio Giancana didn't pray for his son anymore. He prayed for those who crossed him. Still, Sam kept one foot in the house, even as the other stepped out nightly into darker corners. He'd disappear for hours, returning with a split knuckle or a rolled dollar bill he'd tuck into his sock. No explanations, no questions. Chicago's West Side was changing by the 1920s. Italians shared tenements with Jews, Poles, and Irish, all pushing elbows for space. Gangs began organizing beyond brawls. They became business. And Sam, with his low murmur and quick fists, fit right into that transformation. His father may have worked with ovens, but Sam was drawn to something colder. Control. He joined the 42 Gang, a street crew named after their old school number, though hardly any of them were still attending. They were young, angry, and savvy enough to know that crime wasn't just survival. It was a skill. The 42s weren't thugs with bricks. They were scouts for the outfit. Older mobsters kept an eye on the ones who didn't brag, who didn't bleed out from the mouth. Sam, with his poker stare and minimalist vocabulary, moved up fast. One week, he was a lookout on a bookie hit. The next, he was riding shotgun on truck heists, barely flinching when glass shattered around him. Here's a fun one for you. Mooney was once tasked with delivering a briefcase to a man downtown. Routine drop. But instead of handing it off, Sam asked the man why his shirt wasn't buttoned right. That one question made the courier so nervous he left without the bag. Later, Sam handed it over to a boss who said, "You made a man sweat by noticing a button?" Sam just smiled and said, "It wasn't the button. It was the way he kept looking at the window. See, that's the thing." Sam was no genius, but he knew how to make you believe he knew more than he did. That was his genius. By 17, Giancana was doing hits. Nothing messy, drive-bys mostly. One newspaper clipping, long since lost to time, mentions a young Italian male suspected in a shooting near Roosevelt Road, but no names, no arrests. Sam knew when to duck, when to ditch a car, and most of all, when to disappear. Many people still think that Sam's real rise began later, once the outfit welcomed him fully. But those who watched the 42 gang in its prime argue differently. They say the moment came earlier, when Sam, barely out of puberty, stopped following orders and started giving them. He wasn't tall, he wasn't broad, but when Sam said, "We wait," people waited. And when he said, "Now," they moved. That's leadership, not through strength, but something slipperier, confidence wrapped in calm. At home, Antonio noticed the shift too. Sam still rolled dough on Sundays, still stood behind the counter when his father barked. But there was a new glint, less obedience, more observation. One day, Antonio slapped Sam for laughing during morning prep. Sam didn't flinch, just wiped his lip and said, "I've taken worse from better men." After that, they stopped speaking. Information closest to Sam during these years? His garage. Hidden behind their small home, Sam had rigged it into a makeshift hangout, a rotating lineup of stolen hubcaps, gin crates, and always a deck of cards mid-shuffle. Some nights, he practiced loading his revolver with his eyes closed, timing himself between jazz records. It wasn't just paranoia, it was prep. There's a moment, around age 18, where Sam takes a date to Navy Pier. He dresses sharp. She's impressed. But instead of watching the lake, Sam studies the backs of men's jackets, calculating which had pistols tucked under them, which just sagged from bad tailoring. The date ends early. He's not rude, just distracted. Romance never stood a chance once his mind learned how to map threats. By now, cops know his name. So do a few city aldermen. He's not infamous yet, just noticed. And for Sam Giancana, being noticed without being known is the sweet spot. From here, he won't climb. He'll glide. The 42 gang was never meant to last. Like most street crews, it burned fast, loud, and temporary, unless someone figured out how to translate teenage chaos into quiet revenue. Sam Giancana did exactly that. While the others were busy getting tattoos or planning getaway routes, Sam was memorizing precinct shift changes and streetlight timing. He didn't just want to get away with things. He wanted to predict who'd be watching. The gang had its share of brawlers and blowhards, but Giancana was different. He played dumb in front of cops and brilliant in front of bosses. It wasn't long before he started steering the crew, choosing which rackets to pursue. Stolen radios one week, rigged dice games the next. And if someone crossed the line, Sam didn't yell. He didn't even threaten. He just stopped inviting them to jobs. Within a month, they'd be begging for scraps or bleeding in alleys. The outfit, Chicago's most powerful criminal organization, noticed. They had their eyes on every youth crew in the city, but the 42s were producing smarter, slicker candidates. Sam stood out not for his brutality, but for how rarely he had to use it. There's a story, half lost to rumor, about a rival crew that kept muscling in on a card game Sam controlled. Other boys wanted to fight. Sam said, "Let's invite them to play." That night, the rivals won every hand. Drinks were poured. Laughter filled the air. And by morning, those same rivals found their cut short, their tires slashed, and one of their mothers suddenly losing her job at a city office. Sam didn't just play poker. He played people. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? Not much, really. A few bucks from a dice game, maybe. But he brought it home, handed it silently to his mother, and then went to wash his hands. She never asked where it came from, but she did start baking more than usual, and when the flour ran low, she never asked his father for money again. Sam's reputation wasn't built on flashy crimes. It was built on frictionless success. A bookie needed protection. Sam showed up, and business doubled. A liquor run needed guarding. Sam brought trucks home undented. A local girl got harassed. Sam made the guy leave town without touching him. That was the real currency. Efficiency. And yet, the police weren't blind. They just weren't interested in petty arrests when the outfit was playing a longer game. As long as Giancana didn't make too much noise, he was ignored. Once, a detective caught Sam behind the wheel of a stolen Chrysler. Instead of booking him, the officer asked where the kid learned to drive like that. Sam grinned and said, "I watched you last week. Turned signal too early." The cop let him go. At this point, Sam's schooling was unofficial. His teachers wore pinstripes, smoked expensive cigars, and never smiled in photos. He started doing occasional errands for made men. Small things at first. Carry this envelope, trail that guy, pick up this car from Cicero and leave it in a parking lot in Bridgeport. No questions. Just yes. Many people still think that Sam's rise was paved purely by charm, like he waltzed his way into power. But those who saw the early days tell a grittier tale of relentless patience, memorized routines, and a ruthless ability to know when to speak and when to vanish. Charm, sure, but not without calculation. Information closest to him during this stage? A small diner on Taylor Street, booth in the back. Always ordered coffee, black, with a splash of lemon juice. Weird, right? But regulars swear he liked it that way because it kept his senses sharp. No sugar, no soft edges, just like him. One night, a fellow 42 member tried to impress Sam by flashing a stolen watch. Sam didn't even look up. He stirred his coffee, tapped his spoon twice, and said, "Wear that around Cicero and you'll get buried with it." The kid never wore it again. Sam wasn't looking to be flashy. He wanted to be necessary. By the time he turned 21, he was already coordinating minor operations, small-time loan sharking, protection rackets, even quiet talks with corrupt union reps. He was learning that in Chicago, money didn't just talk, it whispered. By then, his father had stopped acknowledging him altogether. They passed like ghosts in the hallway. Sam, now dressing sharper and coming home at stranger hours, once dropped a bundle of bills on the kitchen table without a word. Antonio didn't even blink, just picked up his apron and went back to kneading dough. That silence was the final approval Sam would ever get. What he understood better than most was this: in the world he was building, the loudest man in the room was usually the weakest. And Sam Giancana didn't like being weak. Church on Sunday, crime by Monday. That was the rhythm of Little Italy for many boys in Sam Giancana's neighborhood. But Sam didn't even bother pretending anymore. He had stopped showing up to Mass by the time he was 22, though his mother still lit candles for him every week, whispering prayers in Sicilian that she hoped would catch up with him wherever he was headed. By now, Sam was deeply embedded in the city's criminal bloodstream. His days of petty theft were long gone. He had become a reliable earner for the outfit, someone who could be trusted with more than just errands. He wasn't made yet, not officially inducted, but everyone knew that wasn't far off. Bootlegging had evolved too. Though Prohibition was over by the mid-1930s, the taste for underground business lingered like smoke in an old tavern. Sam found his niche in numbers, illegal lotteries that ran through barber shops, corner stores, and even the occasional church basement. The payout was small, but the volume was massive. It was a poor man's dream and the outfit's silent gold mine. Giancana ran the numbers like a symphony conductor. Everything stayed tight. Runners paid on time, books kept tidy, and no one got too greedy. He was paranoid about one thing above all: attention. Any dealer who made noise, threw cash around, or bought a flashy car got a warning. A second offense got a sudden transfer to East Chicago, where the work was colder and the cops meaner. He also developed a kind of sixth sense, an ability to smell betrayal before it arrived. There's an old tale from this time. A low-level runner started skimming pennies off the daily tally. Not enough to notice at first, but Sam did. Instead of confronting the guy, he waited. Let him do it again. Then a third time. And finally, Sam paid the runner double, without explanation. The next day, that same runner's girlfriend got a promotion at her job. The runner? He left town the following week. No threats, no bodies, just a creeping, cold message. I know, Sam's faith in fear was subtle. He didn't break legs, he broke routines. And for criminals, routine is comfort. Still, there were soft spots. Giancana had married a local girl named Angeline when he was young, and though he rarely spoke about her, people who knew him during those years described a strange calm that came over him at home. They had 3 daughters, and for a while, Sam even considered going legitimate, buying a garage, maybe a bar, something simple. But Angeline died unexpectedly during a surgery in 1954. It wasn't dramatic, just tragic. A quiet hospital room, a sudden complication. Sam didn't cry at the funeral. He stood stiff in a tailored suit, holding his youngest daughter's hand like it was the last thread keeping him human. After that, something hardened. The men closest to him noticed a shift. He stopped talking about anything personal. No mentions of his kids, no more quiet stories about what his wife used to cook. It was as if the door to that part of his life had closed and been bricked over. One associate said. He started dressing sharper after she passed. Pressed suits, polished shoes, like grief gave him armor. Information closest to him now? A small notebook, always kept in his breast pocket. Tiny entries, names, dates, debts, favors owed. Not just criminal contacts, priests, judges, cops. A couple radio personalities. Sam understood the power of influence, and he wrote it down the way an artist sketches outlines before painting. There's one particular entry from that book that survives through secondhand memory. It read, Weds, church raffle, call Father DeLuca, winner. Must be Mrs. L. Now, many people still think that Sam had no interest in community affairs, but little details like that suggest otherwise. He didn't just operate in the underworld. He cultivated a kind of reverse sainthood, quiet favors that bought silence and loyalty in equal measure. This was also the point when Sam's name began floating around political offices. Local aldermen would mutter it with caution. City clerks would suddenly get nervous when someone mentioned a friend from Taylor Street. The outfit wasn't just making money, it was making mayors. And Sam was learning how to rig more than dice. He began attending fundraisers, not flashy ones, but the backroom kind, where campaign envelopes changed hands faster than appetizers. He didn't speak much, just smiled, nodded, and made sure every handshake felt like a gentle warning. And if you asked him then if he missed church, he'd probably say something like, "Only when I need to light a candle for somebody else." If there was one thing Sam Giancana understood better than most, it was gravity. How to make people orbit him without pulling too hard. In a world filled with brutes who shouted orders and broke noses, Sam learned that influence had more staying power than intimidation, especially when wrapped in a tailored suit and a half-smile that never reached his eyes. By the late 1930s, his work with the 42 gang had evolved into something far more lucrative: rigging elections. Chicago, after all, was a city built on ballots that always seemed to fall in the right direction, for the right price. And Sam, still young but already considered seasoned, was mastering the mechanics of invisible power. It started small. A precinct captain would ask for help in securing a few extra votes. Sam would dispatch boys to assist elderly voters, sometimes even voting on their behalf. Nursing homes became gold mines of predictable outcomes. Ballot boxes were delivered mysteriously light until they weren't. Soon, those helps turned into contracts. City jobs were promised in exchange for results. And as one retired precinct worker once admitted, we never worried if it would go our way. We just waited for Mooney to tell us it had. Many people still think the mob only muscled into politics when the money dried up. But in truth, politics was always part of the business model. It just required a quieter kind of muscle. Sam Giancana became the middleman between two languages, the brutal certainty of the outfit and the polite denial of City Hall. It helped that he didn't look like a gangster. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, with that clipped South Side accent that sounded like he could explain the rules of poker and zoning laws in the same breath. Reporters who later encountered him described feeling unnerved, not because of what he said, but because he always seemed to already know what they were going to say. Information closest to Sam during this time? A revolving door of fixers, men with clean fingernails and stained consciences. They called him Sammy when they needed something. He never corrected them, just wrote down their names and waited for the favor to return like a boomerang made of IOUs. He once arranged for an alderman's son to win a scholarship that didn't exist 2 weeks before the paperwork appeared. A month later, that same alderman ensured Giancana's numbers racket wouldn't face administrative interference. Quid pro quo wasn't just a philosophy. It was oxygen. One quiet morning, a Chicago Tribune reporter tried to ask Giancana about rumors of election fraud. Sam simply sipped his coffee, looked out the window and said, "You ever think maybe the city votes for who it wants, but forgets to write it down?" The reporter never printed the quote. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of respect. Sam's relationships with the outfit's higher-ups were evolving too. Tony Accardo, one of the most influential dons in Chicago, began giving Sam more serious responsibilities. Not because he liked him, Tony wasn't known for liking anyone, but because Giancana got results. Quiet ones, clean ones. Things got done, and no one had to be buried in a marsh. The two men weren't friends. They were two sides of the same operation. Accardo ruled with distance. Giancana ruled with charm. But neither blinked when the job got messy. It was during this time that Giancana also began to expand into union work. Not the kind that involved strikes and megaphones, but the kind that meant trucks arrived on time and dues were mysteriously rounded up every month. Labor leaders who resisted often changed their minds after a talk with Sam. He never shouted. He just asked how their mother was doing, and then mentioned the address. That blend of warmth and implied danger became Sam's signature. He once said, "If I gotta raise my voice, I already lost." People listened, and at home, the lines blurred. His daughters remember quiet evenings filled with tension. Visitors who never stayed long, envelopes slipped into drawers, and a phone that always rang once before someone picked up. After Angeline's death, the house remained full but emotionally vacant. Sam showed affection in small ways: a new dress, a better school, a faster car for his oldest when she turned 16. But his daughters later admitted they never quite knew where they stood with him. Loved, yes. Safe? Not always. Not. One night, after a long dinner where he barely spoke, Sam rose from the table, kissed each daughter on the forehead, and said, "Make sure your friends' fathers never try to impress me." Then he left without explaining. They never asked what he meant. Many people still think that mobsters live two lives, one criminal, one domestic. But with Giancana, the lines weren't just blurred, they were erased. He didn't compartmentalize, he flowed, and in the meantime, his legend was growing, not in headlines, but in whispers, across barbershops, diners, ward offices, and pool halls. The charm was real, so was the threat. And by the end of the decade, Sam Giancana had stopped being a promising up-and-comer. He was now essential. Chicago didn't need a stage, it was one. And for men like Sam Giancana, the best roles weren't written. They were carved, one whisper at a time. By the early 1940s, Giancana's outfit apprenticeship was no longer informal. He'd earned his seat at the table, not through bloodbaths or showy moves, but by mastering the art of invisible influence. When Tony Accardo passed him the reins to certain rackets, it was less an honor, more a test. But Sam, ever the calm understudy, didn't blink. He leaned in. One of his earliest official responsibilities was overseeing gambling operations in the South Side. Nothing fancy, just crap games, card rooms, and the occasional high-stakes poker night above a furniture store. But Sam took it seriously. He didn't just count revenue, he read patterns. Who bet too often, who won too much, who sat near the door like they expected trouble. One night, during a routine game at a smoky Cicero dive, a young dealer tried skimming from the pot. Sam watched, said nothing, let it happen again. Then, between hands, he leaned over and whispered, "You got nervous fingers, kid." The dealer stammered. Sam handed him a cigarette. "Smoke it now," he said, "because you're not coming back tomorrow." The kid never did. See, Giancana didn't just enforce order, he conditioned it. People remembered him not for what he did, but for what he implied. A nod could feel like a gun barrel, a shrug like a verdict. It wasn't magic. It was precision. He also started grooming lieutenants of his own, young guys from the neighborhood who reminded him of himself. Lean, quiet, always watching. One of them, Joey Doves, would later say, "Mooney never taught you how to shoot. He taught you when not to." This period also saw Giancana's first real overseas play, Havana. Cuba in the 1940s was a mobster's mirage, swaying palms, loose laws, and casinos that practically begged to be skimmed. The outfit had stakes in it all, and Giancana was sent to ensure everything ran smooth, not just as a courier, but as an observer. A test. Could he navigate a foreign power structure without making waves? He could, and he did. In fact, one Havana associate recalled how Sam managed to calm a rising feud between New York and Chicago interests with a single phrase: "There's enough pie for everyone if nobody tries to own the fork." It was also in Havana that Sam began working alongside men like Meyer Lansky, strategists who didn't care about muscle unless it came with numbers. Giancana watched, listened, and absorbed. And when he returned to Chicago, something about him had shifted. Less neighborhood, more global. Information closest to him during this time? A red rotary phone tucked in a back room of a Cicero cafe. It only rang when things were serious. FBI transcripts later revealed it was tapped for months, but never once picked up a full sentence. Sam had learned the most valuable rule in his business. Silence isn't empty, it's armored. Many people still think that Havana was just a vacation for mobsters, but for Giancana, it was a classroom, a seminar in how international politics, Intelligence agencies and organized crime all brushed elbows in quiet bars with soft jazz in the background. There's a particularly odd but revealing story from this time. Sam was once seated at a table in Havana with several casino bosses and a corrupt Cuban official. The official started bragging about his power, how he could make laws disappear. Sam, mid-sip of scotch, simply said, "Laws don't disappear. People do." The table went silent. The official left early. No one asked Sam to clarify. When he returned to Chicago, it was clear. Giancana wasn't just a manager anymore. He was an asset. His growing influence earned him not just respect, but resentment. Some older outfit men felt threatened by his rise. He was too smooth, too fast, and worst of all, too effective. But Accardo backed him. And when the top dog growls, the rest of the pack lies down. Sam didn't push his luck. He played the long game, took smaller jobs, smiled more, bought groceries himself, sent flowers to funerals of men he didn't like. It wasn't kindness, it was theater, and the audience always noticed. One evening, at a low-key mob meeting, someone jokingly called him the Junior Don. Sam laughed. "Junior's fine," he said, "as long as the checks say senior," and just like that, the room understood. He wasn't asking for power. He was collecting it. They called it the Mooney charm, though charm might have been the wrong word. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't humor. It was that odd, quiet magnetism that made people sit straighter, smile quicker, and second-guess every word they were about to say. And by the mid-1940s, Sam Giancana's presence didn't just sway rooms, it calibrated them. But charm or not, Sam had something else. Control. Subtle, systemic control. And he applied it to everything he touched, especially family. Though his wife was gone, the image of a family man lingered. He kept the house, made sure his daughters attended Catholic school, even hosted the occasional barbecue in Oak Park. To neighbors, he was just Mr. Giancana, soft-spoken, oddly formal, but generous at Christmas. Few suspected that behind the kitchen wall, files were stacked waist-high in cigar boxes, full of ledgers, contact lists, favors, and secrets. One neighbor would later recall, his house smelled like aftershave and caution. Still, Sam was not made of stone. He loved his daughters, deeply, if awkwardly. Once, when his youngest got a failing grade in math, he personally drove to the school, spoke to the principal for 12 minutes, and by the next week, her homework was re-evaluated. Not because he threatened anyone. He simply said, "You're better than this, and so is she." And yet, love wasn't protection from distance. At home, he rarely lingered at the dinner table, always answering calls mid-meal, sometimes slipping out with a kiss on the forehead, and no return until dawn. He wasn't cruel, just constantly elsewhere, out in the world. His name was being spoken in larger circles, politicians, judges, Teamsters. But perhaps most notably, he caught the eye of someone whose voice was almost as smooth as his own. Frank Sinatra. The Rat Pack was becoming more than entertainment. It was orbit, influence, culture. And Sam, always sharp to scent power in non-traditional places, saw in Sinatra both a kindred spirit and a strategic asset. The two men hit it off, not with declarations of brotherhood, but through a shared language. Favors. Sam could open doors in Vegas. Frank could sing on command, shake hands with senators, and charm the socks off anyone too straight-laced to deal with Giancana directly. It was a perfect storm. There's a story, half true, half polished, about a dinner in Chicago's South Side where Sinatra, Giancana, and a few other key players gathered. A waitress spilled wine on Sam's jacket. Everyone froze. Sam looked at her, smiled, and said, "You're fine. Just don't let it be red next time." The whole room exhaled. Frank raised his glass. "That's Mooney," he said. "Smooth even when stained. Information closest to him during this chapter? A pair of cufflinks. Gold. Simple. Worn to every meeting with outsiders. People assumed they were gifts. They weren't. One contained a micro recorder, courtesy of a friend with military surplus connections. Sam never trusted rooms with too many smiles. Many people still think that Giancana's relationship with Sinatra was all flash, glitz, galas, and backroom deals. But those closer to the circle insist it was something else. A bridge. Sinatra got Giancana closer to politicians. Giancana gave Sinatra the sheen of danger without the stain. They needed each other more than they liked to admit. The Vegas connection deepened from there. Sam saw what Lansky had seen years earlier. Casinos were laundromats with chandeliers. Money went in messy, came out clean. The outfit had been skimming the strip for years, but now, with Giancana's hand steadying the flow, profits soared. Quietly, he didn't micromanage. He installed the right people, gave simple instructions, and enforced them with what one associate called the calm of a man who already chose your coffin. No one miscounted, and if they did, they didn't do it twice. Vegas also became a stage for his contradictions. He wore suits worth more than most waiters' salaries, but tipped like he was still running dice games in alleys. He could be warm, funny even, but always one drink away from silence. People didn't fear what he'd do. They feared they wouldn't see it coming. At one Vegas lounge, after watching a particularly shaky performance from a new singer, Sam leaned over to Sinatra and said, "He's good at being average. That's useful." The singer was gone by the weekend. Information about this era is still debated. How much did Sam really control? Was he running Vegas from the shadows, or just managing his slice? Many people still think that he was a figurehead, a puppet. But others, those who watch the money move, say differently. If Mooney stopped smiling, one casino pit boss recalled, 3 floors of business froze. Back home in Chicago, the outfit grew quieter, but more dangerous. Gone were the brash days of Capone. In their place stood men like Accardo, Rica, and now Giancana, men who preferred whispers over headlines and silence over spectacle. But not everyone appreciated the quiet rise of Little Sam. Older members felt he was moving too fast, too far. That Sinatra thing, too public. Those Cuba meetings, risky. And yet, no one could deny the returns. Sam Giancana was the outfit's ace, and a wild card all at once. He kept smiling, and he kept winning. When Sam Giancana leaned into politics, he didn't do it the way a lobbyist might. He didn't knock on doors or write speeches. He twisted knobs behind locked rooms. Chicago, by the early 1950s, was a city that looked democratic on the outside and felt like a casino in the back alley. And Sam, he didn't care who won, only that they owed him. One of his biggest plays came during local elections in the First Ward, the city's most notoriously greased political district. This was where mobsters didn't just fund campaigns, they appointed them. Sam's influence flowed through ward healers and precinct captains like scotch at a funeral. Quiet, warming, and just dangerous enough to remember in the morning. On election night, phones rang in Sam's office before they rang in the press room. He didn't ask if his candidates won, only by how much. One longtime fixer said, "If the machine turned the crank, Mooney oiled the gears." He perfected the use of mules, citizens who'd vote 3 or 4 times under different names. Funeral homes supplied fresh identities. Bartenders spread rumors about polling places. And in some districts, ballots were filled out by candlelight before dawn ever broke. Many people still think that Giancana's political muscle only extended to City Hall. But evidence, blurred, burned, or buried, suggests he had reach far beyond the loop. Cook County sheriffs, state assemblymen, and even a judge or two owed him a call back. He never ran for office, but offices quietly ran through him. One vivid account comes from a janitor at a South Side polling station. He swore he saw Sam step in quietly, nod to the precinct captain, and leave before the sun rose. No words, just presence. The janitor later said, "It was like seeing a priest walk through a poker game. Everyone froze, but still dealt the cards." Back at his base in Cicero, a sleepy suburb with more secrets than sidewalks, Giancana began expanding his operations. He took over local taverns, gaming rooms, and union halls. But what made Cicero important wasn't the businesses, it was the buffer. Sam built walls between himself and consequences. Every step of the chain had layers, and every layer had loyalty ensured by fear or favor. Information closest to him during this time? A rotary dial desk phone in his Cicero office, mounted to a timer. 5 minutes per call. If it rang longer, the line cut out. Sam said it helped keep conversations honest. More likely, it kept them from being traced, and then came the moment that proved his clout. He helped deliver votes in the 1960 presidential election. Chicago swung hard for John F. Kennedy, and behind the scenes, rumors flew like ash from a lit cigar. Mobsters, they said, had turned out votes in key precincts. Who organized it? A name kept floating in whispers, Giancana. Sam never confirmed anything. But when a journalist asked how it felt to help pick a president, he replied, "I never voted. Waste of time. I already know the outcome." That wasn't arrogance, it was architecture. His reward? Access. Sam's association with Sinatra now had an added layer, because Frank was friends with JFK, and that triangle, Giancana, Sinatra, Kennedy, would shape the most controversial chapter of Sam's life. But even before national politics came knocking, Giancana remained fiercely rooted in the outfit's day-to-day business. He reorganized loan sharking like a banker rebalancing a portfolio. He streamlined gambling routes with military efficiency, and anyone who skimmed off the top found themselves reassigned, if they were lucky. One collector named Marty No Knuckles Messina made the mistake of running 2 sets of books. Sam found out not through snitches, but through silence. Marty had stopped laughing at jokes, started smoking indoors, the kind of behavior that said guilt louder than a confession. Sam invited him to dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and wine in a Cicero apartment. They talked baseball, weather, even traded stories about their mothers. At the end of the night, Sam handed Marty a stack of bills and said, "You're gonna take a break from numbers. Try landscaping. Fresher air." Marty retired quietly 2 weeks later. No one ever found the second set of books, but they didn't need to. Giancana's strength was never violence. It was restraint. He didn't need to kill you. He just needed you to believe that he could, and maybe already had. He also began crafting something few gangsters ever achieved: image control. He gave selective interviews, smiled just enough for the camera, wore conservative suits that hinted at power, not flash. Even his most damning photos looked more like campaign headshots than mugshots. Still, his daughters worried. They asked him once, "Why don't we ever go on vacations?" Sam responded, "Because the mailman always finds us, and I like reading the paper in my own chair." By this point, he'd become Chicago's unofficial Don. Not because anyone crowned him, but because no one dared argue. His phone rang when casino funds went missing in Havana. His name was whispered when Teamster pensions looked suspiciously light. Even in Las Vegas, where other bosses held court, Sam's absence felt like a looming presence, and yet he rarely boasted. His philosophy was simple. Better to be the shadow that moves things than the hand everyone watches. You'd think a man like Sam Giancana would have made his move with fanfare, with trumpets or bullets or headlines. But when the outfit's top seat became available, he slid into power like smoke under a door. No declarations, no ceremony, just a shift in gravity, and suddenly everyone was orbiting him. Tony Accardo had stepped back from day-to-day operations, preferring a more behind-the-curtains life. He didn't vanish, he just became fog. And into that structured haze walked Sam, calm and sharpened. No longer the quiet upstart, but the chosen executor. Not the boss of all bosses, those words were for papers and Hollywood, but the man everyone called when something needed handling. And Sam handled everything. He reshaped the Chicago outfit not with threats, but with spreadsheets. Well, ledger books, but close enough. Rackets were consolidated. Middlemen were trimmed. Deadweight disappeared, sometimes literally, but more often just demoted, pushed into dry corners of forgotten hustles. The outfit's profits doubled in less than 2 years, not from new crimes, but from better management. And Giancana did it all with an oddly polite air. He'd call you in for a meeting, serve you a drink, maybe ask how your kids were doing. Then, calmly, he'd tell you why your cousin needed to be removed from a payroll. If you argued, he'd listen. If you insisted, he'd smile. And if you pushed, well, you'd find yourself reassigned to Gary, Indiana, Chicago's idea of a punishment, worse than death. By now, Sam had a core team. Not muscle-bound thugs, but thinkers. Guys who could move numbers, make calls, write clean memos. He used young lawyers, accountants, even a few college grads. Mob business was still crime, sure, but now it had briefcases and quarterly reports. Information closest to him at this time? A map. A large, hand-drawn, ink-heavy map of Chicago and its suburbs, marked with pins, each color-coded. Red for gambling hubs, blue for loan operations, green for political strongholds, and one white pin, his own house. "So I never forget where the cracks start," he once muttered. Many people still think that Giancana loved power for its own sake, but those close to him say differently. Power, for Sam, was never about being king. It was about not being a pawn, and in his world, pawns got buried in parking lots. Still, for all his tactical brilliance, Giancana had his flaws, namely, visibility. He couldn't help but shine a little too brightly. The Sinatra friendship? Fine. But when they started vacationing together, when photos began surfacing of Sam at Hollywood parties, people within the outfit began to worry. And yet they said nothing, because Sam was delivering. Cicero turned into a well-oiled machine. Skimming operations in Vegas became smoother. Havana? Still functioning. And with a national election swinging the Democrats' way, Giancana saw opportunity. He doubled down on unions, specifically the Teamsters. Jimmy Hoffa had already built the Teamsters into a political and financial juggernaut, And Sam, seeing a mirror image of himself, reached out. Quietly, discreetly, with cash. The partnership was simple. The outfit would offer support, votes, muscle, money. In return, Hoffa would steer pension funds into mob-run ventures, real estate, hotels, casinos. No guns needed, just paper. One day, at a cigar bar in Cicero, Sam reportedly looked over a Teamsters ledger, tapped a figure, and said, "That's not profit, that's pre-tax loyalty." The union man laughed. Sam didn't. At home, things stayed oddly static. He still lived in his Oak Park house, a suburban split level with trimmed hedges and a detached garage where unmarked sedans often came and went. Neighbors stopped asking questions after a while. One woman, when interviewed years later, said, "He didn't scare us. He just felt immovable, like the sidewalk." His daughters, now teenagers, lived in a strange world of private schools and whispered threats. Sam once warned a boy who showed up to take his daughter to prom, "You can kiss her hand tonight. If you try anything else, I'll kiss your father's goodbye." Information closest to his heart during this stretch? A small, weathered recipe box filled with index cards, his wife Angeline's handwriting on everyone, pasta sauces, meatballs, biscotti. Sam guarded that box like it held nuclear codes. Once a week, he cooked something from it, alone in the kitchen, with no visitors. That tenderness made him harder to read. How could a man bake perfect cannoli on Thursday and order an execution on Friday? But that was the paradox of Giancana. He wasn't ice. He was mercury, fluid, reflective, always hard to contain. And while he ran Chicago, the country was beginning to whisper louder about his name. Wiretaps, investigations, Senate hearings, even Bobby Kennedy, then a rising political firebrand, began hunting mob connections like a man on a mission. Guess who was high on that list? Giancana saw it coming. He wasn't blind, but he believed something few men dared to believe. If you're charming enough, they won't look too closely. They met in the quiet corners of Havana hotels and the invisible margins of Washington, D.C. agendas. Men in suits, some with briefcases, some with silencers. And in the middle of it all, often in a white shirt and cufflinks, sat Sam Giancana. Not just the head of the Chicago outfit, but now, somehow, an unofficial agent in the Cold War chessboard. It's not a conspiracy theory. It happened. The CIA had a problem. Fidel Castro. He was young, defiant, bearded, and stubbornly alive despite their best efforts. Multiple plans had failed. Poisoned cigars, exploding seashells, even chemical agents designed to make his beard fall out and humiliate him. Nothing worked. So the agency reached for something less official, less American. They reached for Sam through a back-channel network of fixers, middlemen, and ex-agents. The CIA approached Giancana with a wild proposition: help them assassinate Fidel Castro. In return, they'd look the other way on a few domestic inconveniences. Nothing would be documented, of course. Just favors, handshakes, and plausible deniability. Sam said yes, because of course he did. Many people still think that this was Giancana's biggest misstep, that mixing mob business with government affairs was the moment he flew too close to the sun. But others argue this was his most brilliant move. He positioned himself above the law by working with it, however temporarily. And for a time, it worked. The operation was codenamed AM Lash. Sounds like a bad action movie title. But it was very real. Giancana wasn't alone. Tampa boss Santo Trafficante and others were involved too. The plan was simple. The mob would use its Havana connections to find someone close to Castro who could deliver a poisoned pill. Spoiler, it didn't work. The capsule never made it to Castro's coffee cup. The assassin never got close enough. And Castro, he kept growing the beard, kept breathing. But Sam didn't seem too concerned, because the CIA wasn't just calling him about Castro. They were watching him too. FBI wiretaps from the time revealed increasing frustration. Agents would eavesdrop on Sam's calls only to hear opera music in the background, or vague phrases like, "He liked the fish, so we're keeping the bait." One wiretap recorded him saying, "They're listening, Frankie. Let's talk with forks tonight." It wasn't code. He meant, let's meet over dinner, somewhere unbugged. Information closest to him during this time? A locked steel box, buried in the crawl space beneath a Cicero property, rumored to contain handwritten notes, photographs, and tapes, collateral against both enemies and friends. No one ever found it. If it existed, it likely vanished with him. His connection to Sinatra, already suspicious, now became high stakes. Sinatra had close ties to the Kennedys, and Giancana, through his work in certain precincts of Chicago, was rumored to have helped Kennedy win Illinois in 1960. Now you have a triangle: mob, music, presidency. That triangle doesn't sit quietly. And then came the fracture. Bobby Kennedy, appointed U.S. Attorney General by his brother JFK, declared war on organized crime. Not softly, not subtly. He made a list, and Sam Giancana was near the top. That shift stunned Sam. He felt betrayed. "After all I did," he supposedly muttered. The Kennedy brothers, once seen as useful, now became targets of resentment. Bobby had no interest in quiet backroom deals. He wanted headlines. He wanted convictions. Sam's calm began to crack, just slightly. He became more cautious, more irritable. Associates said he started using nicknames even in private. The tall one meant JFK. The skinny one meant Bobby. The crooner meant Sinatra. And the ghost? That was the CIA contact no one ever met twice. Still, Giancana continued managing outfit operations. He expanded gambling into Latin America, smuggled slot machines into the Caribbean, touched operations in Mexico City, Guatemala, and even parts of Canada. He was spreading like ink across a napkin, quiet but unavoidable. And back in Chicago, whispers grew that Sam had changed, that he was no longer just the boss of the outfit, but something more, something global. But with expansion came exposure. In 1961, FBI surveillance intensified. Bugs were planted in his home. Cars were tailed. Phones clicked. And Sam? He responded the only way he knew how. He threw a party. One summer night, in his Oak Park backyard, he hosted an absurdly over-the-top barbecue. Sinatra didn't show, but lesser celebrities did. Musicians, boxers, judges' nephews, a local priest, all laughing, drinking, under a canopy of fairy lights and paranoid tension. The feds watched from across the street. One agent later said, "It was like spying on Gatsby, if Gatsby had a better tailor and worse friends." Many people still think that the CIA mob connection was a temporary affair, an odd footnote in the Cold War. But ask around certain bars in Havana or Miami, and old-timers will tell you, it never ended. It just changed form. Like Sam himself. And Sam? He still smiled, still played the role of host, charmer, and chess master. But now his game board had more pieces. And the stakes? Well, they had never been higher. By the time Sam Giancana settled into Miami for his off-and-on exile, he had already outlived the city he once ruled. Chicago was still under outfit control, sure, but its tempo had changed. The streets whispered less, and surveillance hummed louder. The power was still there, but it no longer flowed with ease. It dripped, it staggered, and Sam, ever the creature of rhythm, was looking elsewhere. Miami in the early 1960s was everything Havana had been before Castro's boot heel dropped: warm, chaotic, and corruptible. The Cuban exile community was exploding, both in numbers and in ambition. Some were revolutionaries, others just entrepreneurs with looser definitions of legality. Sam fit in perfectly. He wasn't running from heat, he was chasing opportunity. From his modest home near Biscayne Bay, Giancana began forging quiet alliances. Not with gangsters necessarily, but with businessmen, casino owners from Nicaragua, bankers from the Bahamas, even a few deep-pocketed expats from pre-revolution Cuba. It wasn't about territory. It was about flow, money, influence, favors. Sam was building a corridor of leverage from Chicago to the Caribbean. One of his favored spots? A low-lit steakhouse in Coral Gables. Booth by the kitchen. Always ordered the same thing: rare sirloin, black coffee, and a side of silence. Staff knew not to ask questions, and Sam tipped in hundreds, folded into linen napkins like apologies. Information closest to him during these days: a collection of foreign newspapers, Spanish-language tabloids from Havana, business broadsheets from Panama, and even a few clippings in French from Quebec. He read everyone, not for headlines, but for names, movement, patterns, connections no one else noticed. At some point, someone asked him, "What are you doing all the way down here?" Sam replied, "Chicago's in my bones, but the sun's better for my memory." Still, the outfit expected results. Miami wasn't a vacation. It was an extension. Giancana began managing laundering operations through offshore banks, mostly tied to casinos and construction fronts in the Caribbean. These weren't violent schemes. They were elegant ones: shell companies, phantom payrolls, and wire transfers that crossed borders before the paper trail even caught its breath. And yet, not everyone welcomed his presence. Florida had its own power players, and not all were thrilled about a Chicago heavyweight sniffing around their backyard. Tensions rose. Meetings were missed. One night, after a particularly tense sit-down in Little Havana, someone tried to slash Sam's tires. He laughed. "They used a steak knife," he reportedly told an associate. "I'd be insulted if it weren't so poetic." But beneath the humor, there was wear. His health was starting to show signs of decline. His voice, once velvet over gravel, began to rasp more. He developed a habit of coughing mid-sentence, covering it with a sip of water or a quick joke. His doctors said stress. Sam said boredom. Still, the government hadn't forgotten him. FBI surveillance followed him from state to state. One particular wiretap caught him muttering in his sleep. Only fragments, but enough to suggest even Sam's dreams were crowded with ghosts. The agency started keeping closer tabs, watching who visited, who called, who left envelopes in the mailbox and never returned. And through it all, Giancana remained maddeningly calm. A federal agent once tailed him for a week, finally confronting him in a cafe. "You know you're being watched, right?" the agent said. Sam just smiled. What's the point of living if no one's paying attention? Many people still think that by this stage, Giancana was slipping. That age, paranoia, or pressure had dulled his edge. But others argue the opposite, that he was simply refining the game, playing fewer hands, but winning bigger pots. At night, he'd walk the shoreline alone. Locals sometimes spotted him in sandals and a pressed linen shirt, smoking, nodding to passers-by who had no idea they were within feet of a man whose phone number used to ring in the Oval Office's back hallway. There's a quiet story, a soft one, that a neighbor's child once lost a baseball in Sam's yard. Too scared to ask for it back, the boy stood on the edge of the grass until Sam noticed. Instead of yelling, Sam picked up the ball, walked it over, and said, "You can't win a game standing still." Then he handed it over and winked. The boy didn't sleep for 2 nights, but he remembered the line forever. At home, Sam rarely answered his own door anymore, not out of fear, but protocol. Visitors came through a trusted associate, always announced. Inside, the decor was sterile. No grand portraits, no gold fixtures, just leather chairs, newspaper stacks, and the faint scent of cigar ash and aftershave, the only personal touch. A faded photo of his daughters on the mantel, one of the few things he dusted himself. And through all this movement, tension, and maneuvering, there was something else, a growing sense that Sam wasn't running out of time. He was waiting for something, maybe a deal, maybe an apology, or maybe just a good ending. Sam Giancana didn't gamble in the way most mobsters did. He didn't bet on horses or play craps into the early morning. His game of chance was subtler. He bet on people, especially the kind who believed they were untouchable. And in Las Vegas, the odds were always changing. By the mid-1960s, Giancana's reach into Vegas had become both wide and profitable. He wasn't skimming nickels anymore. He was redirecting rivers. The casinos may have sparkled under neon suns, but behind the curtain, Chicago muscle kept the engines running. Sam, now firmly recognized as the outfit's financial heart, coordinated cash flows from hotel lobbies to hidden ledgers. Unlike New York's flashier dons, he didn't need to set foot in every operation. He had messengers, middlemen, and math wizards. His instructions traveled by whispers, scrawled notes, and sometimes a single raised eyebrow across a restaurant table. The most reliable ear in Vegas? A pit boss known only as Gravy. Real name lost to time. Gravy could count a cash drawer by sound, and once stopped a cheating dealer by blinking twice. He adored Sam, called him Mr. Midnight, claiming that whenever Giancana's name came up in Vegas after dusk, the lights flickered just slightly. Information closest to Sam during these years? A folded blueprint of a casino vault system in a small leather pouch. He kept it under his car seat. Not for security. He just liked knowing the structure. He said it helped him sleep, and yet Vegas wasn't just about money. It was about messages. One hotel tried to go clean. New management, stricter rules, full audits. Sam sent flowers. Nothing else. Just lilies in a black vase with a card that read, "All roots grow somewhere." A week later, the management changed again. No violence, just change. Many people still think the mob ran Vegas with brute force. But men like Giancana didn't need violence to bend a city. They used presence, reputation, and the occasional cash-stuffed envelope slid across a polished bar at just the right time. Still, Vegas was changing. The FBI had shifted resources west, and new agents, young, clean-cut, sharp-jawed, were setting up shop in rented office spaces above laundromats and diners. They blended in, until they didn't. Sam noticed. He began traveling less, sent representatives in his place, communicated through burner payphones and coded signals. One of his favorite tricks? Placing 2 small rocks in the ashtray of a contact's car, meaning the meeting was on. If the rocks were gone the next morning, canceled. No calls, no texts, just gravel and intuition. But the pressure wasn't just from the feds. Inside the outfit, some began questioning his priorities. The CIA flirtations, the Hollywood ties, the Cuba deals. It all felt a little too federal for the liking of the old guard. And while Sam still commanded respect, he also triggered unease. He sensed it. During one dinner with a few trusted lieutenants, someone made a crack about Sinatra's politics. Just a joke. But Sam didn't laugh. He laid his fork down and said, "When a man brings you a song, you don't ask which party wrote it." No one joked again. There were also subtle betrayals starting to leak through the cracks. A minor courier who got picked up and started talking too much. A trusted accountant whose books didn't quite match the drop envelopes. Nothing huge. Just enough to make Sam tighten the circle. He began holding meetings at odd hours. 3:15 a.m. in a bakery back room. Noon sharp in an empty Catholic school basement. His thinking was simple. Predictability was a liability. And paranoia? Just proof of awareness. He even changed drivers weekly. A rotating pool of quiet young men, always instructed to take different routes, even if it added 20 minutes. One driver got lost once. Sam made him get out halfway through the trip. Didn't yell. Just said, "Walk the rest. You need to know the city better." Still, despite the walls closing in, there were victories. A real estate play in Arizona that flipped quick profits. A nightclub in Havana reopened under a cousin's name. And somewhere in Miami, a banker started sending Christmas cards to Cicero again. Unsigned, but always scented with Cuban cologne. And in those moments, Sam seemed invincible again. But there were other nights, quieter ones, when he sat in his Oak Park kitchen, the same one where he'd watched his daughters grow, now mostly silent except for the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional rumble of a passing train. Neighbors said he still trimmed his own hedges, still waved at the mailman, still smoked exactly 2 cigars a week, never more. Control, even in the mundane. But inside something had shifted. There was a growing distance between the man and the myth, between Giancana, the quiet neighborhood figure, and Mooney, the unshakable outfit tactician who once coordinated with spooks to unseat a dictator. Information from this period remains frustratingly fragmented. Some files remain sealed, some tapes misplaced, and some truths buried along with the men who carried them. But the outline remains clear. Sam was slowing, still sharp, still feared, but no longer untouchable. And for a man who had built a life on distance, emotional, strategic, physical, that kind of closeness with vulnerability, it didn't sit easy. For a man who once moved through Havana suites and Vegas vaults with equal ease, Sam Giancana's life had gotten unexpectedly small. It wasn't the houses or the cars. He still lived comfortably, still drove polished sedans that smelled like cedar and aftershave. But the world had tightened. Conversations grew shorter, visitors more carefully chosen. His laugh, once familiar and low like velvet folding over itself, now came out quieter, more as a shape in his chest than a sound in the room. The outfit still recognized him as a presence, but not always as a priority. Power in Chicago was subtly shifting again, toward new players, quieter bosses, more calculating bookkeepers who didn't crave headlines or Sinatra's friendship. They weren't scared of Giancana, but they remembered him, like a storm that had passed but might still turn back. Back in Oak Park, Sam settled into a strange rhythm. He started cooking more, not just the occasional meal, but full dinners, elaborate, careful dishes with slow sauces and exact slicing. He played old Italian records while he stirred, sometimes Puccini, sometimes a scratchy bootleg of Louis Prima. The music wrapped the house in nostalgia and occasionally the ache of being left behind. One day, a local plumber came to fix a leak. Young guy, nervous, said he recognized the name on the mailbox. Sam welcomed him in, offered espresso. The man declined. Sam shrugged. Good, that leaves more for me. That was his charm, still flickering even now. But the truth was, federal heat hadn't cooled. In fact, 1965 saw a major escalation. Giancana was subpoenaed to testify before a federal grand jury investigating organized crime. And this time, it wasn't a game. The government wanted names, dates, wire transfer trails. Sam invoked the Fifth Amendment 54 times. He didn't flinch, didn't sweat, just sat there in a tailored suit, answering with silence. And that silence, it echoed louder than any confession could have. Still, his refusal to cooperate came at a cost. Not from the feds, but from inside. The outfit had always tolerated heat, but not when it burned their fingers. Some believed Giancana's public defiance brought too much spotlight. Others resented the attention his celebrity friendships brought. There were whispers that he had gotten soft, or worse, that he thought he was bigger than the outfit itself. Information closest to him during this time? A stack of handwritten letters, mostly unsent, mostly unfinished. Some to his daughters, some to old partners. One, simply addressed, "To whom I owe my peace," was found years later, still folded and tucked between pages of a recipe book. Many people still think Giancana could have smoothed things over. That one meeting, one nod, could have returned him to the circle. But by then, the rules had shifted. The outfit was changing. Loyalty was being rewritten. And Sam's brand of leadership, charismatic, central, unmistakably seen, no longer fit the page, and so came the exile. He left the U.S. for Mexico in 1966. Not exactly a fugitive, more like a man being allowed to disappear. Officially, he claimed it was for health reasons. But everyone understood the truth. Chicago didn't want him around, and the feds wanted him far enough away to avoid headlines. He settled in Cuernavaca, a quiet city just south of Mexico City, known more for poets and botanists than gangsters. There, Sam lived in a modest villa, complete with a gardener, a cook, and a back patio where he'd smoke and read newspapers flown in weekly. He told neighbors he was a retired businessman. They believed him. He was polite, rarely loud, and paid his bills in full. One teenage neighbor even said he reminded her of her grandfather, just with better shoes and a deeper stare. But even across borders, he didn't stop working. There were still contacts, still favors called in. Cash moved from hands to hands to hands, and sometimes back again. He kept a journal, a simple one, filled with phone numbers and cryptic codes. The writing was neat, careful. The entries stopped abruptly in late '72. Occasionally, visitors came. Some were known, some weren't. One man, balding with dark glasses, arrived in a government-marked vehicle and stayed for less than 10 minutes. Another, with a Cuban accent and a limp, visited twice in a single week and never returned again. Sam said nothing about them, but afterward, he always cleaned the ashtray himself. Despite the sun and the flowers and the garden walls, he was aging fast. His health declined. Liver trouble, doctors said. Stress, Sam insisted. A man who'd lived so much by instinct couldn't quite relax, even in exile, and yet he wasn't afraid, just slowed. He began writing letters again, actual ones this time, to friends, to his daughters, even to a priest from Chicago he hadn't spoken to in decades. The tone was reflective, calm, always formal, no apologies, just observations. In one, he wrote, "They say I built walls. I didn't. I just stopped letting everyone in." Back in Chicago, murmurs began again. The feds wanted him back. The CIA might have unfinished business, and inside the outfit, old debts remained unpaid, some of them emotional, some of them dangerous. By 1974, Sam's name resurfaced on both government and internal lists. The question wasn't if he'd come back. The question was, would anyone let him stay? He returned to Chicago in 1974 like a ghost retracing his own footprints, quietly, deliberately, and with the unsettling poise of someone who never really left. No press conference, no marching band, just a private flight, a tailored overcoat, and a black sedan waiting on the tarmac. Giancana stepped onto Illinois soil again with the ease of a man visiting an old flame, half nostalgia, half unfinished business. Except this time, the city had changed, and so had the stakes. He was now a man between two dangers. The federal government wanted answers, and the outfit wanted distance. No one welcomed him. They just tolerated him. Briefly, the stated reason for his return was medical. Liver treatment, maybe a few quiet checkups. But no one really believed that. The real reason, as whispered by federal agents and outfit watchers alike, was pressure, either to testify or to disappear on someone else's terms. Still, Giancana didn't act like a man on borrowed time. He rented a modest home in Oak Park, not far from his old one, and resumed routines as if the last decade hadn't happened. Groceries, tailors, espresso, all with the same smooth pacing, the same practiced nonchalance. One neighbor said, "He looked like a man who had just gone to the store and come back 10 years later." Nothing rattled. He even called old friends. Some answered, some didn't. Those who did found the same Sam, quick to joke, slow to explain. But there was an edge now. Something faintly metallic behind the smile. A narrowing of the eyes that lingered a second too long. Information closest to him at this time? A rotary phone wired through a sound scrambler, courtesy of a contact who dabbled in radio tech. He only used it at night, always sitting in the same chair, a legal pad at his side but rarely written on. He listened more than he spoke. Meanwhile, the government circled tighter. In 1975, Sam was subpoenaed again, this time in connection with the Church Committee hearings, a sweeping investigation into intelligence abuses by the CIA. The target? Connections between the CIA and organized crime. Specifically, assassination plots against foreign leaders. Specifically, Castro. And who better to testify than a man who'd been in the room when some of those plans were drawn? Sam was not thrilled. He avoided the committee at first, sent letters, filed delays, cited health. But the government kept pressing. They didn't just want to know about Castro. They wanted to know about everything. The outfit, Vegas, the Teamsters, Hoffa, who by then had already vanished under suspiciously familiar circumstances. Giancana's world, once so perfectly partitioned, was unraveling. The lines between mob loyalty, federal interest, and old vendettas were blurring fast. Many people still think that Sam planned to talk, that he was tired, frustrated, sick of the game. But those closest to him say he was preparing to refuse, just as he always had. That he'd go in, take the fifth, smile politely, and walk out. But the outfit didn't like maybe, and by now, Sam was a maybe. Inside the organization, younger blood had taken over. New leadership didn't care about the old rules, about Mooney's charm or Sinatra stories or long-past favors. To them, Sam was a liability, an old name in a new world. And worse, a man with too many memories. Still, Sam wasn't blind. He hired more private security, changed his routines, met people only in public. His circle grew even smaller. Just a few trusted associates, a couple relatives, and a doctor who still made house calls. But even in those final weeks, the old charm flickered. A waitress at a neighborhood diner recalled how Sam always ordered minestrone, no crackers, and left the same tip, $20, no matter the check. One day, when she asked if he liked the soup, he said, "Not really, but the quiet here's worth paying for." At night, he played records, mostly Sinatra. The irony didn't bother him. Music had always been a shield. There's a strange tale from this time. Sam was walking through a parking lot late one evening when a car backfired nearby. Anyone else would have jumped. Sam paused, then adjusted his tie. "If it was for me," he later said, "I wouldn't have heard it." He was right. Information from these final days is hazy. Surveillance was still in place, but spotty. Friends recall phone calls that seemed normal. Neighbors reported seeing him gardening. One said he waved while trimming roses the afternoon before the end, but inside, something was tightening. That night, a close friend, Dominic Butch Blasi, came over. They cooked liver and peppers, a classic. The mood, calm, some wine, some quiet music. Sam was relaxed, even laughing at one point about how long it had been since he'd had a proper Chicago sausage. Then, sometime between the dishes being rinsed and the table being wiped, he was shot 7 times, once in the back of the head, 6 more in the mouth. Symbolic, surgical, final. The shooter left the back door open. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Just a cooling dinner, a humming radio, and a man slumped beside his own stove. The house was quiet for hours before anyone noticed. When police arrived, they found no note, no weapons, no witnesses. Just Sam Giancana, Chicago's last charming don, sprawled like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one wanted to finish reading. The newspapers had a field day. Mobster slain in suburbs. Giancana executed in his own kitchen. From Cuba to Cicero. The long fall of Mooney. Headlines screamed what Sam Giancana himself had whispered his whole life, that he had always been a man people wanted to silence. And now, someone finally had. The details of the crime were clinical. No signs of forced entry, no struggle. A clean hit. 7 bullets. 1 in the back of the head to drop him. 6 in the mouth, like an epitaph carved in lead. The symbolism was obvious. That mouth had known too much, spoken to the wrong ears, or perhaps was about to. And that's the debate that still lingers like a cigar haze in a room no one's willing to clean. Did Sam Giancana plan to talk? Or had he simply lived too long? The church committee hearings, the CIA records, the rumored testimony. It all added up to a man who was either about to break his silence or being punished for refusing to. Theories swirled. Some blamed the outfit, tying it to rising internal leadership who feared Sam would cave. Others suggested it was the government itself, an unofficial warning to anyone else thinking about peeking behind the curtains. One popular theory involves the infamous Blasi, the man who shared dinner with Sam that night. Longtime friend, sometimes driver, loyal to the end. Or perhaps not. After the murder, Blasi disappeared from headlines, from photographs, from life. Some say he went into hiding. Others say he was retired. No one really knows. Sam's funeral was modest by mob standards. Closed casket, family only. A few former allies sent flowers. Sinatra? Nothing. Not even a telegram. Just silence. Perhaps guilt. Perhaps calculation. Giancana was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, not far from Al Capone himself. A patch of grass now holds two names, separated by decades but forever linked in lore. Chicago's past, tucked under headstones and clipped hedges. His daughters, by then grown, never spoke in detail. Not about the murder, not about the business. They kept their distance from reporters, declined interviews, and let the mystery wrap around their father like a second burial. Many people still think the killing was a message, but no one agrees on what the message was. Was it a punishment? A prevention? A farewell gift from men who once feared him? Or maybe, just maybe, it was the final move in a game that had gone on too long, when everyone else had already left the table and the house? The Oak Park kitchen with the red tiled floor? It was cleaned, sold, repainted, the stove replaced. But neighbors say that for years, no one stayed in it for long. Doors creaked more than they should have. Lights flickered for no reason. And the silence, always sharp, always humming, like a man holding in the last thing he'll never get to say. What's left of Giancana today? A few files in federal archives, a locked drawer in Langley, anecdotes from retired FBI agents, dusty recordings that picked up more static than voice, and whispered memories across Chicago diners from men now too old to care who's listening. He's part of America's mythos now, not just a gangster, but a shadow stitched into history. Not as loud as Capone, not as feared as Gotti, but slipperier, smarter. A man who knew where all the lines were and exactly how to step over them without leaving footprints. Even now, scholars argue over his place in the underworld's hierarchy. Was he a visionary? A traitor? A relic of a vanished code? And his end, so clean and theatrical, it doesn't read like real life. It reads like a final act, too perfect, too deliberate. Like someone, somewhere, closed the book before he could rewrite the ending. And maybe that's fitting, because Giancana didn't need to shout to be remembered. He just needed to smile once and let the silence take care of the rest. He was never crowned. There were no ceremonies, no pledges, no dramatic sit-downs in smoky back rooms. But by the early 1960s, everyone knew. Sam Giancana had become the heartbeat of the Chicago outfit. Not the loudest, not the bloodiest, but the one whose pulse made the rest of the machine breathe. His power didn't announce itself. It seeped, quietly. There's a particular kind of authority that doesn't need to yell. It enters a room with a tilt of the head, a glance, a chair left unoccupied for just a second too long. That was Sam. While other bosses barked orders or slammed fists, he whispered. Or better yet, he paused, long enough for you to feel your own mistake unravel. From his Oak Park home and Cicero hideaways, Giancana orchestrated a network of rackets, politics, casinos, and personalities. He managed crews like chess pieces, moving some, protecting others, sacrificing only when necessary. Everyone had a place, and everyone understood that place could vanish without warning. He wasn't unpredictable, just unreadable. His command structure wasn't rigid. It was relational. Loyalty was currency, and betrayal didn't need to be punished immediately. Sam knew how to wait, how to make time itself do the punishing. Many people still think that by this point, the outfit had begun to decline, fractured by age, by surveillance, by younger mobs rising in New York and the West Coast. But insiders say Giancana's reign was the last time the Chicago outfit truly moved like a single coordinated organism. His gift wasn't fear. It was focus, information closest to him. A rotating set of ledgers, all handwritten, all kept by different men who only saw one another in passing. He didn't trust any single bookkeeper with the whole picture. Only Sam had the master copy, and that one he never wrote down. One of his underbosses once asked what would happen if he died suddenly. Giancana smiled and said, "Then everyone else dies confused, and that's still a kind of power." He spent less time in public now. His face was familiar enough that photos showed up in papers, usually with disclaimers like, "Suspected of ties to organized crime." As if the title hadn't already become shorthand for him, he played golf with aldermen, sent gift baskets to hospital wings with his name on nothing but the card. His enemies couldn't touch him, not because they feared his wrath, but because they feared what would happen after. Killing Giancana wouldn't end anything. It would just open doors no one wanted to walk through. And still, he whispered, when a collector mishandled a payment route, Sam didn't scold him. He invited him to dinner, poured the wine himself, told a story about a dog that used to steal bread from his father's bakery. "We didn't beat the dog," he said. "We just stopped baking in reach." The collector got the message. He returned the full amount, plus interest, within the week. Giancana's name reached places his feet never did. Baton Rouge, Toronto, Puerto Rico. Anywhere money flowed and power felt thin, he was consulted, not commanded. A broker of ambition and consequence, he avoided internal drama. Let younger men have their turf scuffles, provided they didn't disrupt the larger flow. But if they did, he reminded them, gently, who had opened the gate they were now guarding. He kept a few old friends around, not for nostalgia, but perspective. One of them, a tailor named Enzo, had known him since the days of the 42 gang. Sam visited his shop once a month, always late, always alone. Never talked business, just fabrics. Enzo once asked why he still came. Sam replied, "Only one of us ever measured me honestly. In public, he remained the same polished figure. Gray suits, clean shoes, pressed collars. If anyone asked why he didn't flaunt his wealth, he said, 'Real power wears silence better than diamonds.' But cracks had begun to show. The FBI had shifted its strategy. No more chasing bodies. They wanted bank records, informants, tax evasion. Men around Sam began getting picked up. Some talked, some didn't. But the walls were getting closer. And Sam, he never flinched, because when you've reached the top by whispering, you don't panic when the volume rises. You just speak softer. If ever there was a moment when the myth of Sam Giancana collided with the madness of American celebrity, it was her, Marilyn Monroe. The name alone was enough to make senators blush and bodyguards glance away. And by the early 1960s, she wasn't just a movie star. She was a gravitational force, bright, erratic, and always spiraling too close to dangerous men. And Sam? Well, Sam had always been comfortable near heat. The details are muddy. Purposefully so. History leaves fingerprints, not full handshakes. But most agree on this. Marilyn Monroe moved in circles that overlapped both the Kennedys and the outfit. Frank Sinatra was the pivot point. He loved being the bridge, between power and glamour, between government and gangland. So when Sinatra hosted parties at Cal Neva Lodge or his Palm Springs estate, the guest list often blurred the lines of respectability. Politicians, starlets, mobsters, handlers, bodyguards, it all melted under martinis and music. And somewhere in that blur, Sam and Marilyn crossed paths. She liked him, not in the wild, romantic sense tabloids love, but in the curious way broken people sometimes recognize each other. Sam was quiet, steady, and amused by her chaos. Marilyn, in turn, found in him a stillness she didn't find in the camera lenses or Kennedy phone calls. There's a story that during one poolside party, she asked Sam what he thought of the president. Sam didn't answer. He just said, "You don't belong to anyone. That's your danger." Many people still think that Sam and Marilyn had a full-blown affair. Some say it was just a handful of conversations. Others insist he used her for leverage, to get closer to the Kennedy brothers, or at least to better understand their fractures. Either way, proximity became poison. The FBI noticed. Wiretaps from this period reveal sudden upticks in monitoring. Giancana's phone calls were intercepted with renewed intensity. Agents even followed him to a Sinatra-hosted fundraiser in Nevada, where Monroe was also spotted, blonde, tired, and clinging to a champagne flute like a lifeline. Information closest to Sam at this time? A small gold locket with no photo inside. He carried it often. When asked about it, he said it was empty on purpose. Some think it was a gift from Marilyn. Others say it was just a prop, another silent mystery he kept in his pocket like a decoy for curious minds. The danger wasn't just the association, it was the perception. If Sam was too close to Marilyn, and Marilyn was too close to Jack or Bobby, well, now you've got triangulation of the worst kind. A love triangle where every corner holds a secret, and a wiretap. By the summer of 1962, pressure was boiling. Monroe was unraveling. Chemicals, confessions, paranoia. She called too many people, left voicemails, showed up at doors that stayed locked. She reportedly threatened to go public with her knowledge of CIA plots, mob ties, Kennedy affairs. Then she was gone. Officially, overdose. Unofficially, everyone had a theory. Giancana said nothing. He didn't send flowers, didn't comment to the press, didn't even mention her name again, except once, in passing, at a dinner party, when someone brought up tragedy. Sam, sipping a black espresso, said only, "Stars burn too hot. That's why they vanish." The Kennedys, meanwhile, were turning colder. Bobby, as Attorney General, had become obsessed with rooting out the mob. And Sam, once perhaps a favor-doer in the 1960 campaign, was now a name on a board in a Justice Department war room. The Monroe affair, whether real or imagined, only added to the fire. Inside the outfit, too, whispers grew louder. Sam was getting too close to the limelight. The mob liked shadows, not headlines. And while Giancana had always danced that line masterfully, this was different. This was national. One lieutenant confronted him about it, asked if all the Sinatra parties and Hollywood connections were worth the attention. Sam answered, "The minute they start talking, they stop watching." It was clever. It was also wrong, because everyone was watching now. He still walked the streets of Oak Park like nothing had changed, still dined in public, still tipped generously. But the atmosphere had shifted. Waiters leaned in less. Friends asked fewer questions. Even Sinatra, once so quick with the midnight phone call or spur-of-the-moment invite, grew quiet. That's the thing about power tied to charm. It needs a crowd. And Sam, for the first time, was starting to lose his. There's an old rule in organized crime. The moment people start whispering your name louder than they whisper your orders, your days are numbered. By the mid-1960s, Sam Giancana was hearing more whispers than ever, and not all of them respectful. Inside the outfit, younger bosses were restless. They'd watched Sam cozy up to celebrities, entertain journalists with veiled smiles, and tangle with the CIA like it was a side hustle. That was never the Chicago way. Chicago favored invisibility. Sam, once the king of quiet control, now glimmered just enough to make the rest of the table nervous. And when a man like Sam made people nervous, they didn't confront him. They waited. It started subtly. Calls not returned. Meetings postponed. fewer names showing up at his backroom dinners. The lieutenants he trusted most began showing signs of hesitation. Not betrayal exactly, just a noticeable reduction in warmth. In his world, that was more threatening than a gun. He wasn't exiled overnight. Betrayal by proxy, after all, is more art than act. There's a story about a sit-down he called in Cicero. 4 outfit capos were supposed to attend. Only 2 showed. When asked about the others, they cited traffic. Sam smiled, tapped his glass with a spoon, and said, "Chicago traffic's a killer, huh?" The tension at the table could have cracked marble. Many people still think that Sam had lost his touch. But in truth, his mind was sharper than ever. He just couldn't outrun the architecture he helped build. The younger faction wanted a lower profile, less Sinatra, more spreadsheets. They respected the myth, but feared the man. Giancana didn't fight it. Not at first. He knew the rules. He had helped write them. But it stung. Not because he needed control, but because he had become, slowly and quietly, unwelcome. He began pulling back. Fewer public appearances, less involvement in daily operations. He stopped traveling to Vegas entirely. Havana, of course, was lost. Miami felt distant. He poured his energy into smaller things: cooking, letter writing, evening walks in Oak Park under an increasingly wary sky. Information closest to him during these days? A radio scanner set to the police band. Not because he was planning anything, but because he wanted to know how far away the noise really was. He'd listen for hours, sitting alone with a glass of vermouth, picking out voices he didn't recognize. And then came the final straw. In 1966, word came from inside the outfit that it was time for Sam to leave. Not with a bullet, not with a body bag, with a suitcase. Exile, Mexico, not optional. The message was delivered with smiles, of course. For your health, just while things cool down. Think of it like a vacation. Sam heard the subtext clear as church bells. You're a liability now. We won't kill you unless you make us. He agreed, because what else was there to do? He handed over control of key revenue streams, turned over safe houses, even gave up a few favorite restaurants where he used to receive backroom updates over pasta and Chianti. In return, he asked for 3 things: his Oak Park house, access to certain bank accounts, and a promise that no harm would come to his daughters. They agreed, and Sam, never one to drag drama out of a room, left quietly. Information about that departure is scarce. Some say he flew out under a fake name. Others claim he drove himself to the border, stopping only for coffee and to toss his old phone into a lake. Regardless, by summer of '66, he was gone. In Mexico, he lived like a retired politician, not quite hiding, but not announcing himself either. A modest villa, a few servants, occasional visits from trusted friends. He spent mornings reading foreign papers, afternoons in the garden, and evenings re-watching old reels of Italian films he'd had shipped in from Chicago. And yet even there, the whispers followed. The FBI suspected he was still in contact with Chicago. The outfit feared he might flip. The CIA, well, they had their own files, sealed in places no one could reach. Even in exile, Sam Giancana was a problem that no one could fully solve. And problems like that, they don't disappear, they wait. Cuernavaca, Mexico, the city of eternal spring. To tourists, it's a place of blooming jacarandas, colonial courtyards, and sleepy afternoons. But for Sam Giancana, it became a waiting room. Not quite prison, not quite paradise, just somewhere in between. From 1966 to 1974, Giancana lived in a villa behind high walls, guarded more by his name than any hired muscle. The Mexican government knew he was there, kept tabs on him, occasionally visited. But they never made a move to expel him. Whether it was quiet diplomacy or well-placed bribes, Sam remained untouched. He lived simply. That's what neighbors remembered. A man who kept to himself, who wore tailored shirts even when no one visited, who always paid in cash and always tipped well, even when buying nothing more than cigarettes and newspapers. But behind those walls, the mind kept turning. He still ran mental ledgers, still scribbled notes, still made phone calls from dusty payphones in Mexico City, where the receiver lines clicked a little too often. Messages were routed through intermediaries, friends of friends who understood that a call from Mr. Mooney meant instructions, not small talk. And what was he waiting for? A return? A re-entry into Chicago's inner circle? Maybe. Or maybe something else. Because by the early 1970s, the political tides in America had shifted. The church committee hearings were forming, a massive congressional effort to investigate abuses by the CIA, secret operations, assassination plots, unholy alliances. And guess whose name surfaced in the earliest drafts? Giancana's. Many people still think that Sam's involvement with the CIA was fleeting. But internal memos, some now public, many still redacted, tell a deeper story. Sam wasn't just a tool, he was a partner. In certain moments, the line between criminal and asset blurred entirely. Castro wasn't just a target, he was a shared obsession. Information closest to Sam during this time? A stack of manila folders kept in a fireproof lockbox, some labeled in code, others in shorthand only Sam understood. According to one visitor, the folders weren't about money. They were about leverage. And leverage, in exile, is how a man like Giancana buys time. But time was running out. The Mexican authorities, under U.S. pressure, began reconsidering his stay. New political winds meant old deals were losing value, and the FBI, never one to forget, petitioned for Sam's deportation. In July of 1974, he was arrested by Mexican police. The arrest wasn't violent. It was administrative. Giancana, in his usual white linen suit, was escorted politely to the airport and placed on a plane bound for Chicago. No cuffs, no press, just quiet murmurs and a one-way ticket back to a city that no longer had room for him. When the plane landed, the FBI was waiting. Not with guns, but with paperwork. They escorted him not to prison, but to a secure hotel room. Interrogations followed. So did veiled requests to testify. But Sam, still calm, still calculating, offered little. He didn't deny anything. He just refused to remember. For nearly a year, he was caught in limbo. Not a fugitive anymore, but not exactly a free man either. The government wanted him to appear before the church committee. The outfit wanted him gone. And Sam? He wanted pasta. That's what he told a reporter in one of his few recorded comments after returning to the States. People ask what I want, he said, smiling just a little. I want pasta. I want quiet. I want them to forget I ever existed. They didn't. He settled back into his Oak Park home. Not the same one as before, but close. A neighborhood where the lawns were tidy, the mail arrived on time, and everyone pretended not to know who lived in the cream-colored house with the drawn curtains. He lived alone. No guards, no entourage, just a man and his routines, morning walks, evening pasta, soft jazz from a dusty radio. Information closest to him now? A burner notebook he kept in a drawer near the stove. Names, doodles, phone numbers, but no conclusions, just fragments, like he was writing a story only he could understand. The FBI kept circling. The outfit kept watching. Everyone seemed to be waiting for Sam to do something, to talk, to disappear again, to tip his hand. But Sam Giancana, after a life of whispers and wagers, did none of those things. He cooked dinner, he listened to the radio, and he waited. Because maybe, just maybe, he still had one more move left. The knock came late, not in the poetic sense. Trouble came knocking, or death tapped on the door like an old friend. No, it was literal. One evening in June 1975, just after Sam Giancana had finished cooking liver and peppers, someone knocked on his back door. Not the front, not the side, the back. The kitchen entrance, the one used by old friends and older ghosts. Sam answered. That's the part no one disputes. What happened next is built of silence. Neighbors say they didn't hear gunshots. Just a sudden, strange quiet, like the world held its breath. Hours passed. Lights stayed on. The kitchen fan hummed through the night. The radio played itself into static. By morning, Sam Giancana was dead. 7 shots from a .22 caliber pistol. 1 in the back of the head, the starter. 6 more in the mouth. The message. It was surgical, personal, symbolic. You don't shoot a man in the mouth that many times unless you're making a point. That he talked too much, or was about to. The irony, of course, is that Sam had never been known for talking. Many people still think the killing was a government job, an execution arranged to keep certain secrets buried. After all, he was scheduled to testify before the church committee just days later. But others argue it was the outfit's final judgment. An old boss made inconvenient by memory, loyalty, or the simple fact that he had outlived his usefulness. Information closest to him at that final moment? A half-peeled garlic clove on the cutting board. A pan still warm on the stove. A chair pulled back just slightly from the table, as if he were about to sit and never got the chance. The investigation was short and pointless. Police found no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, no fingerprints worth printing. Just a dead man, a quiet house, and a crime scene that felt more like punctuation than violence. Dominic Butch Blasi, the friend reportedly with him that night, claimed he'd stepped out. Said he came back and found Sam already dead. But that story, like so many in Giancana's orbit, never fully settled. Blasi vanished not long after, disappeared into whatever dimension failed mobsters retreat to when history stops needing them. Giancana's death sent a ripple through the outfit, though not the tsunami it might have a decade earlier. Times had changed. Power had shifted. Younger bosses moved in quietly, content with the way he had not talked. His death had tied off loose ends before they could fray. The church committee acknowledged his murder with a brief, grim nod. They moved on. The hearings continued. The questions lingered. But the answers? They died with Sam. His funeral was private, tight-lipped. A few suits, a few tears, one priest. No headlines. The men who owed him favors now owed someone else. The women who once watched him walk into nightclubs in Havana had long since moved on or faded into velvet-curtained memories. They buried him in Mount Carmel Cemetery, plot not far from Capone. Different styles, different eras, but in the end, the same dirt. Information that remained after his death? Scattered. A few notes in CIA archives, redacted. An FBI memo titled Giancana S.L., unresolved. And a dozen or so people in Oak Park who remember the smell of garlic and gunpowder in the summer of '75. There's a story, unconfirmed, probably embellished, that a week before he died, Sam said to a neighbor while watering his roses, "You ever see the end coming and still can't look away?" The neighbor thought he was joking. He wasn't, because Sam knew. He had always known. In his world, you don't get to keep what you've taken. Not forever. You borrow time. You lease loyalty. You rent silence. And when the lease is up, someone knocks. You answer. In Oak Park, the summer carried on. Lawns were trimmed. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across sidewalks. Children rode bikes past the cream-colored house on South Winona Avenue, some glancing up, some never realizing the man who once held Chicago by the throat had just been lowered into the ground. There was no monument, no ceremony, just a cleaned kitchen floor, a patched bullet hole in the wall, and a brief obituary that danced carefully around the words everyone already knew. But inside the outfit, inside the shadowy boardrooms and backroom lounges of Chicago's criminal spine, there was unease, because Sam Giancana had died too neatly. Yes, he'd been a liability. Yes, he was scheduled to testify. But 7 rounds to the head and mouth? That wasn't a silencing. That was a statement. And when a man dies like that, it doesn't just end something. It stirs something. Rumors bubbled fast. One said that Giancana had begun keeping a fail-safe journal, a handwritten, tightly coded document meant to surface if anything happened to him. Another claimed he had taped conversations with both federal agents and mob lieutenants, storing the reels in a bank vault under someone else's name. Yet another whispered that Sam had once mailed a package to an ex-girlfriend in Miami with the instructions, "If I'm gone and they lie about me, show them this." No package ever surfaced. Many people still think that the outfit's newer leadership had no choice, that Giancana's continued presence, even in quiet exile, was a risk they couldn't afford. But others believe the call came from outside, that someone higher up, or further away, wanted Sam off the board before he could flip it over. And if you believe that theory, then his return to Chicago wasn't just tolerated, it was engineered. Information closest to Giancana in those final weeks? A phone list of names, most crossed out, not scratched violently, just methodically, as if he were taking inventory of those who were gone, retired, or waiting for a call that would never come. Among the uncrossed names was one no one recognized, just a first initial, an out-of-town area code, and the phrase, "Don't forget, he knows the boat." What that meant, still debated. Some say it referred to Cuba. Others believe it was code for a money route through Panama. One archivist at a university crime study program swears it's tied to a yacht that had been docked off Florida during the height of the CIA mob collaboration. Whatever the truth, it's buried deeper than Sam ever was. After his death, agents combed through his properties. They found books, some cash, expired passports, a few Sinatra records, no confessionals, no secret dossiers, just fragments, like a man had lived 1,000 lives and left behind only enough pieces for the next myth to grow. One FBI report described Giancana as a reluctant kingpin, reluctant only because he knew what the throne always cost. It was poetic, if a little generous, but not wrong. He had built a legacy not of bloodshed, but of balance, of knowing who to please, who to pressure, and who to simply wait out. His genius wasn't just what he did, it was what he understood. The outfit had changed. The country had changed. By 1975, it wasn't about rackets and card rooms. It was about stocks, real estate, union contracts. Violence still happened, but it had moved into shadows even darker than the ones Sam had ruled. He had become a symbol. And symbols, as history shows, are often easier to erase than explain. There's a final photo of Giancana, taken just days before his death. He's standing in his backyard, slacks, loafers, a cigarette in hand. The expression? Tired, but not afraid. He's looking just past the camera, like he sees something the photographer doesn't. And maybe he does, because in the life Sam Giancana lived, the future was never far. It was always just around the corner, in the next knock, the next silence, the next headline someone else would write. It was the neighbors who spoke first. They remembered the man who trimmed his own hedges at dusk, who nodded instead of waving, who brought his trash bins out precisely at the same time each week, like he was keeping rhythm with a drum no one else could hear. To them, Sam Giancana wasn't a gangster. He was Mr. G, quiet, polite, a little odd, the kind of man who didn't borrow sugar, but always returned a snow shovel cleaner than when he received it. After the murder, reporters came like flies. Parked vans, flashbulbs, rumors. But in the neighborhood, doors stayed shut. People shook their heads. That poor man, one said. He was always alone. The FBI swarmed. Dozens of agents moved in and out of the house. They bagged evidence, some legitimate, some hopeful. A half-finished crossword puzzle, 2 bottles of imported wine, a drawer full of labeled receipts, most hand-scribbled in ink that had already begun to fade. Still, nothing useful. They never found recordings, or tapes, or ledgers. If Sam had kept records, he had either hidden them somewhere no one ever looked, or he destroyed them when the air got too still. Information closest to the investigation? A small black book with initials, not names, every initial paired with a date, and 1 note written diagonally across the back page. Rain always comes before the quiet. Analysts still don't know what it means. Poetic? A warning? A farewell? Theories about the killer changed weekly. Some swore it was a high-level outfit hitman flown in from out of town. Others said it was someone Sam knew, someone he had once mentored. There were whispers about federal involvement, Cuban intermediaries, even a last-ditch deal gone sour. But the truth, if anyone ever had it, died the moment Sam's head slumped forward in that kitchen chair. One agent, in a moment of strange candor, said, "It's like he opened the door for death and offered it a drink." Many people still think that Giancana knew the end was coming, that his behavior in the last week changed, that he cooked more than usual, that he made 2 extra calls to his daughters, that he polished his shoes even though he wasn't planning to leave the house. But others insist he was simply living the only way he knew how, deliberately. That every motion, every gesture, was one last act in a life that had been choreographed from the moment he ditched the bakery and picked up a dice game. And then there were the kitchen details. Police noted that the stove was still warm. That dinner was prepared for 2. That there was a second plate on the table, untouched. A glass of red wine. A linen napkin folded twice. No fingerprints on either. To this day, no one knows who that second plate was for. Some say it was a friend. Some say it was an enemy. Some say Sam said it for himself, to remember the man he used to be. The life he used to run. The silence he once wore like a second suit. There's a kind of tragedy in being feared for your words, only to die with a mouthful of bullets. But there's also symmetry. Giancana had lived by quiet threats, soft moves, and unspoken leverage. The mouth had always been his most dangerous weapon, and someone, somewhere, decided to close it for good. The house was sold within the year. The new owners painted over the kitchen tiles, removed the blinds, tried to make it bright, but a contractor quit halfway through the remodel, telling his foreman, "The walls feel like they're listening." And maybe they were, because houses remember things, especially the quiet ones. especially the ones where no one screams. The bullets stopped, but the story didn't. Even after the funeral, after the flowers dried and the headlines faded, Sam Giancana remained, not in body, but in atmosphere, in memory, in mystery. In Chicago, his name was still spoken, albeit more carefully now, a kind of whispered punctuation in conversations about power. Not like Mooney, they'd say, referring to new bosses fumbling with subtlety. He knew how to keep things tidy. Tidy was an understatement. He left no tapes, no betrayals, and no clean trail. Just echoes. The FBI didn't stop investigating. They couldn't. Giancana's name still surfaced in interviews, in subpoenaed documents, in connections that refused to dissolve. Agents combed through his files, mapped his phone records, hunted for secret accounts. What they found was just enough to keep hunting, and what they feared, that Giancana had played them all, right until the very end. Many people still think the man who pulled the trigger was never caught because he never really disappeared, that he was known, protected, perhaps even thanked. Some speculate it was a mercy killing, that Sam knew it was coming and welcomed it. A final moment of control in a life built around maintaining the upper hand. His daughters stayed quiet. They gave no tell-all interviews, wrote no memoirs, at least not right away. It was as if they understood what others didn't, that to survive his shadow, you had to keep your silhouette small. But stories leaked anyway. A former outfit driver claimed he once delivered an envelope to Sam containing a list of men the new bosses wanted reviewed. Sam handed it back and said, "I don't rewrite stories I didn't start." Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. It feels true. It's the kind of line that belongs to a man like him. Information closest to the lore now? A growing stack of FBI declassified files, many still redacted with thick black ink, sitting quietly in the National Archives. Historians piece them together like puzzles. Names, phone numbers, meeting spots, surveillance logs. But it's never quite enough. Every answer leads to two new questions. And so Sam's legend grew. In Vegas, old dealers still mention his name when a shift ends in silence. In Florida, a banker once claimed a Mr. Mooney set up a dormant account that was never closed. In Havana, a former hotel concierge remembered a man in a gray suit who tipped in American 50s and asked no questions, but always chose a corner room. It wasn't long before books were written, biopics pitched, documentaries narrated in gravelly tones over black and white photos of Giancana lighting a cigarette or stepping out of a courtroom. And in every version of the story, he looks calm, not cocky, not indifferent, just aware. That's what separated Sam from the rest. He didn't rule with fear or fire. He ruled with anticipation. He was always a beat ahead of the problem, a whisper faster than the rumor. Even in death, he remained ahead. A popular theory emerged years later, that Sam had left behind a final message encrypted in the financial records of a defunct charity, a line item discrepancy, a series of numbers that could be a code. Treasure hunters and amateur sleuths obsessed over it, but nothing ever came of it. And that's the point. Giancana's legacy wasn't built on what he said. It was built on what he let people believe. His enemies feared his memory more than they had ever feared his presence. In one Southside bar, where the mirrors are older than the patrons, a plaque still hangs over the booth Sam used to favor. It doesn't say his name, just 3 words carved into the wood. He ate here. No date, no quote, just acknowledgement. And maybe that's the most fitting tribute. Not a shrine, not a statue, just a nod. A space where power once sat and didn't need to explain itself, because in the end, the man who said so little left behind a story too large to quiet. And the silence? Well, it still hasn't finished speaking. In the underworld, time forgets most names. Faces blur. Stories get sharpened or softened, depending on who's doing the telling. But with Sam Giancana, the forgetting never fully took, even as newer generations took control. Men with fewer vowels in their surnames and more digits in their offshore accounts, Giancana remained a reference point, a measure, a standard, not of brutality, but of balance. He had ruled not by fear, but by knowing things, knowing what to say, when to say it, when not to say anything at all. And when that's your power, death isn't the end. It's just the moment the questions begin. In the years after his murder, his legacy fractured into three versions. The politico's Giancana, the man who delivered Chicago to Kennedy, the fixer, the silent guest at fundraisers, the handshake that made precincts sway, the quiet reminder that democracy could be steered, just not always gently. This version of Sam became a cautionary tale for campaigns. Never owe more than you can repay, and never assume the kingmaker won't come back to collect. The CIA's Giancana, the rogue operative, the mobster turned pawn in Cold War chess, Castro's would-be assassin, the man who showed the agency that influence couldn't always be compartmentalized. His involvement with the CIA still sparks debate in academic circles. Was he a patriot in disguise? A manipulator of both sides? Or simply a man who knew how to make two enemies think they were each holding the leash? And then there was the neighborhood Giancana, the man in the pressed shirt picking up bread in Oak Park, who tipped the barber before sitting down, who always bought a second newspaper, even if he never read it, just in case. This version of Sam never made the documentaries, but he's the one people remembered most clearly. Many people still think that the mob turned on Sam because he was talking, but it's just as likely they turned on him because he didn't need to talk anymore. He carried too many stories, and stories, in the wrong hands, become liabilities. The outfit could handle rats, but a man like Sam, a man who held truths instead of secrets, he was a different kind of dangerous. Information closest to the truth may never be found in archives. It lives in the missing seconds of surveillance tapes, in the unread notes taken by agents who retired with locked drawers, in the whispered recollections of waiters, drivers, barbers, people who saw him in the quiet moments where myth meets flesh. There's one haunting footnote in an FBI field report from the late 1970s, written by an agent who had tailed Sam for years. It read, "The subject never ran. He just slowed down. You can't chase a man who knows where the road ends." If that's not Giancana's epitaph, it should be. Some say he was the last real Don in Chicago. Others say he was just a bridge between eras, between the brashness of Capone and the corporatized mobsters who came after. But either way, his absence created a vacuum. And vacuums in this world are always filled by noise. The new bosses spoke louder. They used threats instead of presence. They made enemies faster than they could count envelopes. And while they made their money, they never made the city listen the way Sam did. He wasn't just feared, he was respected. Respected by aldermen, agents, assassins, and waiters. By priests who knew what was behind his donations. By judges who never saw him in court, but felt his presence in the hallway outside. He once said to a young associate, "Loud men break, quiet men bend." That associate ended up in prison. Sam ended up in the ground. And somehow, Sam still seems to have gotten the better deal. Even now, his story gets told in low tones. Not because people fear the consequences, but because that's just how his story sounds. It was never a shout, always a murmur, always a shadow at the edge of a sharper light, always unfinished. Time, when left alone long enough, doesn't erase legends. It polishes them, smooths the rough edges, softens the blood, leaves behind only the silhouette of a man who once walked through rooms like a rumor. And Sam Giancana? He became the kind of story people tell when they want to impress silence. It's been decades now. The men he once commanded have all followed him underground. The bars they drank in are condos. The phones he used have long gone quiet. And yet, his shadow remains. Not in deeds, not in dates, but in the style of it all. Because Giancana wasn't just a gangster. He was an approach. There are bosses who lead by shouting. There are leaders who cut a path with fear, fire, and fists. But Giancana, he led with suggestion, with timing, with the kind of patience that made lesser men nervous. He didn't need to remind you he was dangerous. He let you remind yourself, and in the end, that's why they couldn't let him live. Not because of what he did, but because of what he still could do. Many people still think his greatest achievement was bringing the outfit into modern times, making it sleek, political, precise. But others argue his real gift was intangible, creating an atmosphere where fear didn't need teeth because it already wore a smile. The outfit after Sam Giancana became colder, more clinical, fewer toasts, fewer suits that fit just right. The business endured, but the tone changed. He once told a young collector, "If they know you're coming, you've already lost the advantage." Sam always arrived 10 minutes early and always left before anyone realized he'd said more than they remembered. Information closest to him at the end? A passport with no stamps. A drawer with 2 cufflinks and 1 loose bullet. And a note, found years later, scribbled on the back of a diner receipt that read simply, "They'll bury the body. The silence is up to you." The silence. It still hums in Chicago, in the hush of diners where no one mentions his name, but everyone knows who once sat by the window. In the slight hesitation when reporters ask, "Who really ran this town?" In the pause of retired detectives when asked if they ever really got Giancana. No one says yes. No one says no. Just silence. The same silence Sam wore like a tailored overcoat. And that's where he lives now. Not in headlines, not in archives, but in atmosphere, in the quiet confidence of someone who knows what you need before you ask, in the steady stare of a man who never blinks first, in the tension that arrives not with violence, but with a name. Giancana. He wasn't the last mobster, but he was the last to make you lower your voice when you said it out loud.